So Matt Rhule had an off-season press conference the other day where he talked about a few different things. But Gary and I both agreed that by far the most interesting thing mentioned is essentially a cancellation of Nebraska's spring game going forward.
Are you able to say at this point whether or not there will be any form of scrimmage that day?
I'll be honest with you, I highly doubt it. And I think it's really fundamentally, I hate to say it like this, it's really because, last year we're one of the more televised, we were one of the more televised spring games, and I dealt with a lot of people offering our players a lot of opportunities after that. So to go out and bring in a bunch of new players and then showcase them for all the other schools to watch, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The word tampering doesn't exist anymore. It's just absolute free, open, common market. And so I don't necessarily want to open up to the outside world. I don't want these guys all being able to watch our guys and say, wow, he looks like a pretty good player. Let's go get him.
Initially, upon hearing this, I personally was not happy. But once it dawned on me as to the why he would cancel a tradition that is such a fun event for the fans. I mean, bottom line, I want to go to the spring game this year. But once I realized why it's necessary, I think, Gary, I'm completely okay with it. And I would even say that I applaud Rhule as sort of a visionary for seeing and getting ahead of this problem.
Yeah, I had heard talks about not just Nebraska, but a handful of schools doing away with the scrimmages, spring games, red and white games, whatever the team's colors are games. And I'm just like, I almost thought it was more of a, it's not worth it for the school, blah, blah, blah. But when in the press conference where he's asked about it, and he says, last year we were one of the most watched spring games in the country. And almost immediately after, a lot of the players start getting flooded with offers from other schools and essentially programs trying to poach your players. And I don't know that it's as big or is going to be as impactful as I initially kind of ran with in my head. But I'm like, okay, now you're seeing the other side of the lawlessness or the Wild West in modern college football. There's a ton of people that hate it, a ton of people that don't like all the traditions, from the rivalries to the somewhat traditional, the way we got used to knowing conferences as they were, to the overhauls, roster changes in the offseason, things like that. I think it's actually a good thing for Nebraska. I think one of the big complaints and one of the big criticisms you've heard about Nebraska as a program over the years is that we can't recruit with the Ohio States and obviously the SEC schools and things like that. And now that it's legal for everybody to pay everybody, not just certain schools, to pay players, Nebraska has a lot of money. They have top-notch facilities. The list goes on of why Nebraska is a top program. It's just been a lack of talent in a lot of people's eyes. And now I feel like it's really leveled the playing field, or even given Nebraska a leg up. But that is the downside, right? And canceling spring games doesn't seem like a big deal. But the more I started thinking about, yeah, that makes sense to protect your roster, but then you hear other schools doing it. It's like, okay, this was kind of the new college football, the way the off seasons are and everything, have pushed programs' hands to, instead of all publicity is good publicity, where you have your coach on Colin Cowherd and First Take and ESPN and the different radio shows or podcasts, to get the program out there a little bit more, to be in front of high school kids more. Now you're seeing a shift in, okay, now the priority is protecting the roster we have, and breaking that down, or going more into that, in my opinion. Again, I don't know anything. When you and I've talked about it, I'm like, I could be completely wrong, but this is just what it looks like when you compare it in this, on the same scale you would look at business, for example, and you look at like a free market. There's things will go up and they'll go down because you have different checks and balances, whether that's an overseeing organization like the NCAA, who I think massively dropped the ball by letting it go to the Supreme Court and not getting their input or their rules and regulation in place before, when they were just like, no, absolutely not. No one's getting paid. And then it turns into a different deal that goes to the Supreme Court and they say, well, you can't do that. Okay, now you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So a lot of rules that the NCAA would want to try to implement at this point would go against the ruling. So that's where, in my opinion, we have this kind of free-for-all. But the free-for-all is only going to go so far, because the money is what made this happen. These TV deals getting into the billions and trillions of dollars in all sports, but bleeding into college football, is why there's so much money, why there's profit sharing across conferences, along with the ruling, obviously. But now teams are like, okay, this this lack of structure or guidelines or rules or whatever you want to call them makes it to where my team is never my team. It's never safe. I mean, it's been college football nowadays is compared to the NFL offseason, but it's more wide open than that. There aren't contracts, there aren't collective bargaining agreements, there aren't all kinds of checks and balances that are put in the NFL. So you're literally trying to herd cats as far as keep your roster, but also you have the ability to go get guys as you want every time a portal opens, which is not just the offseason like you would have in other major sports. So this move, if you get your Ohio States, Alabama's, Georgia's, Texas, the big schools that look at the Big Ten network, the amount of money they make hinges on how much they can cover college football when college football is not on. Everybody's watching football when football's on. But now these spring games, if they're not going to be on or they're going to be a fanfare day, that's not going to draw the eyeballs and in turn draw the advertisement dollars that actual games are going to, the real hype, things being gassed up. You have Big Ten does their bus tour every year where they go to all the schools in the Big Ten, and a lot of people watch all of them. Most fan bases watch at least their team, and you get that with the SEC. ESPN's pretty much the SEC network. If you start taking away what they can sell to advertisers and draw eyeballs on TV, they're going to police themselves in the sense of going, okay, hold on, what do we have to do to try and basically force these schools to be relevant, have more of a storyline in the offseason, because you're not going to have coaches gassing up players they're getting to the extent you used to, where they're out like parading them around, showing them off. You're looking at losing a game in spring when you've been out of football for a couple months and you're a couple months away from football starting. I don't know how much behind the scenes look schools are going to be giving these networks when they go to try to do that, or how interesting or how much information your coaches, coaching staff, key players on the team are going to give you when you go to visit schools, when you have Big Ten media days, different things like that. So to me, right away, I kind of, not trying to force the issue, but it just kind of dawned on me when I'm thinking about, like you're saying, the spring game deal is like, is this the beginning of a turning point where you're going to start seeing, whether it's self-regulation or the conferences come together and go, okay, hold up, we're going to start losing money on the network side of things if we can't get these programs and these coaches to go along with what's been going on. If they start being more protective, more secretive, trying to stay off grid and more behind the scenes, which is the exact opposite of what they've been trying to do for years, that's going to affect the pocketbook, which is in turn going to affect how much money these conferences are getting, which is going to in turn affect how much the smaller schools that are going to be relying on a lot of the conference profit sharing money to be able to add a guy or two. It's not the same as some of these other schools that have initiatives. So I took it a whole different route than just the spring game's not going to be on this year, most likely. And, they talked about doing some variation of it. So there's still a whole deal. And that might draw some intrigue this first year to see, let's see what these schools do different, or what this school does different from this school if both schools aren't having a scrimmage, or a spring game, so to speak. But I feel like you're starting to see the negative sides that we as fans have always seen and pointed out with the portal and NIL deals and whatnot. It doesn't matter if it doesn't affect anybody's pocketbook. If somebody's making money off of something, they're going to exercise every option and avenue they can take to ride that out, but also increase that dollar amount. And when you see them doing things that are going to go against the big money, not just, don't get me wrong, it's not like, oh, they're going to break these networks or they're going to break these conferences doing that. That's not the situation. You got to look at every time they renegotiate for a TV deal. It's not just, well, we need to stay where we were at. They're always looking to increase it. Both sides. They want to get more money for what they're putting on the screen for you. They want to get more money, but you have to show that, okay, well, we can get you more views. And then that's where a lot of things have come with, just a small kind of off-topic example would be in the NFL with the whole Taylor Swift thing. Like, what fan base, what demographic have you not tapped into? Because everybody and their mom watches the NFL, right? There's an argument I've heard, and when you kind of like look into it and do your own thinking and research, kind of makes a lot of sense that all of a sudden Taylor Swift is such a hand in hand with the NFL, especially the Chiefs, the best team, arguably, or whatever, record wise, at least in the NFL, and things kind of start to go hand in hand. But in college, it's so new that you don't really know what 5 to 10 years of what we've seen in the last year or two pans out to look like. Do you go old? Does it turn into old school baseball where you've got, the Yankees, Dodgers, and Red Sox, or does it turn into what I see it turning into? I think it's even more wild than that when you don't have contracts and you don't have collective bargaining agreements, to where schools are like, okay, the top schools, the top tier schools, the ones that are going to draw the most eyeballs for TV deals, for advertisement dollars, things like that. They're good money wise. You can take away the profit sharing, and you're not going to hurt Nebraska and Ohio State and Texas and Alabama and Georgia. You're going to hurt Minnesota and, I don't know, Oregon State and smaller schools like that. So like, you're going to really separate even more the top from the bottom, and get rid of the entire middle class. Or you're going to have what you're starting to see, where these big schools, they're like, we don't need the money. We need to protect this roster. We need to protect our program, so that, one, we're not getting poached. Two, we're not putting on display. It goes deeper than that too. I mean, how many guys did we lose last year? We lost Bly Hill, and Rhule talks about it. We lost Bly Hill, and we lost a couple guys essentially for the season in that spring game. And we've seen that in years past. So I think as you see teams and coaches do things, think back to the NBA, man. Like, I'm a Spurs fan, but remember when Popovich was kind of the first coach to start not playing players on back-to-backs or long road trips. And it turned into a deal where the NBA came out and was like, okay, we're going to fine these teams if a guy isn't really hurt and they're just taking him out. I remember the big deal was the Spurs going to the Heat and left like Ginobili, Parker, and Duncan all at home, and people lost their minds, because you've got fans, that are going to that game because it's more affordable and easier to go to, because they want to see those guys. But the coach is looking out for the team and the roster and the long-term season, right? So you understand both sides of it. You don't have these contracts you have, and you don't have the money you have without the fans, without the TV deals, without the hype, and talking about these games throughout the week before the next game comes up, and it being hot topics on talking podcast, radios, TV shows, all that stuff. But at the same time, when you continue to put yourself out there and make yourself basically full access for the league to prophesize on, by being full access to fans, how does that hurt your team? And it could be attrition, in the sense of, like, we're talking about the Greg Popovich thing. We're talking about the guys we lost last year in the spring game. But now you're looking at rosters when there's no rules on. You're Michigan and I'm Nebraska. I have a spring game where this guy comes out of the woodwork, a Ja'Cory Barney type situation that we had last year. And now you've got 5-6 other big name schools with big pocketbooks coming after your guy, after you've put an off season, a winter conditioning, and a winter, practice, beginning of spring practice together. And this guy could be a pivotal piece. And now he's gone, and you've got 2 months to get ready for your first game, putting somebody else in. You've got 2 months to get yourself ready with a new guy in place to you know what I'm saying, kind of start over from scratch. And it's just, I think you're starting to see the tip of the iceberg in multiple areas. This is just obviously a topic related to our team based off of what our coaches talked about, where you're going to start seeing the backswing part, where it's kind of almost putting the brakes on the just all out wide open. And I think if it gets to a point where it starts affecting dollars, then you'll see overhead rules. And I think we're seeing the beginning of where coaches are starting to worry a little bit more, and they're starting to be the ones that implement, okay, we're not doing this, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that, blah blah blah, because they're looking to protect their assets. And if that protecting their assets snowballs or spills over into not just costing, but even possibly jeopardizing dollars at the significant dollar amounts we're talking about, whether it's with networks, other sponsors, or people who are paying money, that's getting this money to trickle down. If that looks like it's going to be in danger in any way, you will see either, I don't know if you're going to get some kind of a committee from all of the conferences, if you'll see conferences starting to work more with the NCAA, and the NCAA starts to make more of an impact, where they're kind of, nobody thinks or cares what they got to say anymore after that ruling. I just think I think this is the very beginning of some more of some type of structure being put in place on, you mentioned it when we were talking. And like I said, I don't know. I couldn't tell you what the answer is. People have a lot of opinions and good ideas on how that should look, but whether it's contracts with players, and that could be the next level of teams protecting themselves. You might see 2 or 3 teams go, we're going to pay a lot of money for these players, but we're only going to do it if they're under some type of a contract. If the player doesn't want to be in at least a 2-year, let's say a 2-year minimum type of a contract with us, to where they can't leave no matter who comes calling, how the team looks after that first year, whatever, then we're just not going to sign them. There's a lot of talent, you know what I mean? There's a lot of talent you can pay for. And if you start seeing that, now you're going to separate even more the top from the bottom, because not everybody's going to be able to do that with the bulk of a roster. You might have the NCAA or these conferences get together and tell their schools tampering is actually going to be a real thing now. I mean, tampering supposedly was more. No one's getting in trouble for that hardly anymore. You hear talks of like so-and-so's under investigation for this or that, but we all know it's wide open. You know, it really is the Wild West right now as far as recruiting and in the transfer portal of picking off players, or, you know, going and snatching people that just signed. You know, guys literally will just sign, and the next thing you know, they're gone. Next portal opens. So I took that whole little tiny bit of that news conference that he talked about. I took that whole half-hour news conference or press conference, initially kind of the same reaction as you, like, well, I mean, no spring game, man. That's kind of right in the middle, breaks up that long stretch of no. Not that there's no football, because it's a year-round deal now in both sports, NFL and in college. But being able to sit down, you know, we streamed it the last couple of years. We sit here and talk about it, watch the game. You get to kind of see the validity or overhype that we've heard about what's going on in practices that we don't get to see, finally getting to see it. And then when you start thinking from what he's saying, from an injury aspect, and more importantly, getting your roster picked apart by vultures, like, yeah, that makes sense, man. Yeah, I would rather not watch a spring game and not have our roster screwed with, let alone all the other things I just went over. You know what I mean? So like, to me, that in itself is enough. The more I think about that, is like, I remember being a little kid. Every Husker fan remembers their first spring game. You know what I mean? And then like that it's a thing every year. And it's like, okay, now that's gone. And it's real easy to go, see, this is bullshit. This is the problem with college football. And it's like, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that statement, but the bottom line is, it is what it is, and it is what it is based off money. So when you start looking from a money perspective, going down the rabbit hole of things, I think this is just the very beginning of more things that come. And in a long game, I think you'll start seeing, like you said, possibly contracts. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more of like a harsh deal on tampering, and there's a more strict guideline. I wouldn't be surprised if you have less portal dates, you know, like there's one, maybe two portal days instead of, well, there's the early one, there's the late one, then there's the spring one, and then there's one. Like, I don't even know how all the portal stuff works at this point anymore, because I feel like it gets expanded and added every year. But I think, if anything, and I don't mean it from the stance of, well, Matt Rhule said this, so now college football is going to get all these things changed. He's not the only one. There's a lot of schools looking at doing the same exact type of deal. And I think that things are going to slowly snowball the other direction now, and you're going to start getting a little bit more of rules and regulations put in place.